Welcome to the Lights Out Podcast. This is Chris Lights Out Lytle, and this is our journey to document the history of mixed martial arts. I have brought with me my friend, the MMA detective Mike Davis, and together we will preserve the history and hear some great stories from the world in the era of the no holds barred. Thank you and enjoy.
The Lights Out Podcast, very special episode with somebody I've been trying to track down for a minute now. A guy that is just got his hand raised in his own hometown in Salt Lake City. Court McGee. What's up, brother?
Just coming on here to do an interview. Deep dive into the history of the Crusher.
That's right, dude. So you've got a real interesting career, but like your path to get there. Whatever you accomplish inside the ring, it seems like what you accomplished outside of the ring was much more difficult than any opponent you ever faced. Why don't we start from the beginning in your battle with addiction?
Okay. So I grew up in a middle-class family. I have two great parents. My as a matter of fact, on October 5th, they celebrated 45 years of marriage. Very supportive, hardworking middle class. And I have one older brother that's about 18 months older than me. We didn't do a lot of sports growing up. We did a lot of service work. I grew up in a heavily religious community. The LDS faith is here, Mormonism. But I didn't grow up in the church. I wasn't baptized or a member, and my family wasn't either. But in saying that, like we would say grace at dinner, say prayers at night. So like there was a presence of a higher power, presence of God, but it was a God of my own understanding. But what we did do, and looking back on it now, being almost 40, we did more service work than any family I know. I mean, we were always helping neighbors. We were always helping people. So I had like good work ethic and great supportive parents kind of in whatever I did. I didn't do a lot of sports, but what happened at a young age was I had some cousins. They were pretty well traveled. There's an amusement park here in Utah called Lagoon. It's like a smaller version of Disneyland, I guess. Lots of rides and things like that, or just an amusement park. And I went there and I was pretty young. I was only like 6 or 7. And I had a cousin that was 6 or 7, and then our little bit older brothers, and then one older cousin that was about 14 or 15. He was kind of in control of us. So our parents left and went and did something, and we went to the amusement park, and I ended up getting separated from the group, me and my cousin David. And I got scared because I didn't know where they were, and I went and I hid kind of in between these garbage cans by a hot dog stand, and I got separated from the group for like, I don't know, somewhere around 10 hours or something like that. They ended up kind of shutting down the park and sending out search parties trying to find me. And I mean, it was over 100 degrees. It was hot. I ended up with like heat stroke and sick. And then I had just like a lot of issues after that. Like I got real nervous about going to school. I just started elementary school. Man, I was like scared of crowds. I was scared I was going to get left. I got scared of the dark. And my mom and dad decided to take me to therapy to see if it could kind of help. Because I was in like 6th grade, and all of a sudden I started sneaking back into my parents' room. I need to sleep in here. I'm just deathly afraid of everything. And I went to therapy, and I don't remember anything from the therapy, but what the therapist suggested was maybe you should get your son into martial arts. And so my dad kind of searched around, and he found like a karate school in a neighboring town, and they signed me up for karate, and I just took to it. Around that time, I played 1 season of t-ball, and that's the only sport I've played outside of some sort of hand-to-hand combat or wrestling. And then, it's like off I went. I mean, obviously it stuck. Here it is, 34, 33 years later, and I'm still doing martial arts, but I was passionate about it. In middle school, I experimented a little bit with drinking. My dad's a drinker. He's a beer drinker. And I grew up with a very supportive dad and someone who drank often. I don't know if I could characterize him as an alcoholic, but probably drinks more than he should because of health reasons. But in saying that, I've never seen him raise his voice to my mom, not in my whole life. Never been arrested. Is the second largest donator in the history of blood donation in the United States with over 60 gallons. Like, you don't get any better of a guy than him. And my mom. And my mom grew up in a tough environment. And she's very like firm and very straightforward and probably the hardest working person I know. And so, it's like, it kind of like, I would dip into my dad's beer. And then in high school, I started getting into some fights and getting into some trouble a little bit. My drinking progressed a little bit, but I found wrestling. And then during my high school career, a documentary called Mark Schultz or called Mark Kerr, the Smashing Machine came out.
Oh, dude.
And I had already seen some MMA fights, some old, UFC VHS, UFC 1, 2 through 6, and I would always go walk to Blockbuster and get them and watch them, and I loved it. I was, it was awesome. But when I saw Mark Kerr, I thought, holy shit, like that's the guy I want to be, right? And for me, like looking back on it, I think being the toughest, baddest son of a bitch on the planet would like fill that hole that was inside of being left when I was a little kid, maybe, or something. I wanted to be the baddest dude I knew. And then that way, no matter what happened, I would feel safe, and just a single track mind. And I started wrestling. I decided I wanted to be like him. I wanted to be a Division I All-American and, maybe a world champion or something. And so off I went with wrestling and became one of the top wrestlers in the state. I had some injuries that needed surgery. And during that time in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was kind of the height of Oxycodone. So lots of prescriptions, right? There was a tremendous amount. By 2002 or 2003, it was the height of the prescription. Not to mention they were giving low dose oxycodone or Oxycontin out for like injuries, not terminal cancer patients, which was kind of designed for that potent of a narcotic. And so
let's also, they would also tell you that it was less addictive than Vicodin.
Oh yeah. Well, and that's what the pharmaceutical company and the salesman would tell doctors.
And the doctors would repeat it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's one of those things. And at the time I had a couple of friends. I had one friend, he had was climbing up a building and fell off and broke his ankles and broke his feet and compressed some discs in his back. So he got prescribed pain medication. And then after graduation, I got into an accident on a scooter and I shattered my collarbone, and they prescribed me Oxycontin. It didn't get fixed. I went to a doctor that wasn't a special, like a sports, like an orthopedic sports surgeon. He was a hand and elbow specialist. And for like 2 or 3 weeks, I was in a lot of pain, but I ended up getting a second opinion. And it was shattered in a bunch of places and I had to go get it fixed. So I got more pain pills, and at the suggestion of my friend, he's like, "Hey dude, you should suck off this coating and crush it up and snort it." He said, "It takes care of the pain, but it hits you a lot faster and it feels good." And I was like, I was drinking beer and I had some repercussions. I'd like got in trouble with the law. I'd gotten a bunch of fights. I think at that time I had a DUI. And I had drank the night before, and I got pulled over in the morning, and I was really upset because I had cleaned up the campsite we were at. So I wasn't drunk in the morning, but I was underage, so zero tolerance. As in I was under 21 and I had alcohol in my system. And so I got arrested for this DUI. I was speeding. I was, doing like 10 over, and I got pulled over, and there was a bunch of beer bottles and beer cans and, just
screwed.
Stuff. Yeah. And so I got arrested for DUI. So I had a target on my back. I had been working in the summers, and so every dollar I made went to pay lawyer fines and court fees and restitution. And, it's like problems started happening and more reoccurring. And then that injury happened, and I had the Oxycontin. I snorted it, and I realized like really early on that I could achieve like a buzz, but nobody could smell it because they could smell the alcohol. You know, my dad was like, "Man, you smell like beer. You know, you smell like you can't go to work smelling like that." And you know, some of my coworkers would be like, "Dude, you still smell like you drinking last night." You know, and I was like, you know, 18, 19, 20 years old, like, and I was drinking a lot. Um, and I just couldn't stop. Once I started, I couldn't stop. You know, I'd be like, "Oh, I'm only gonna have 5 tonight," and then I'd end up having, you know, 10. And I'm like, "Well, I got to keep 2 for the morning because I'll have shakes in the morning, and if I keep 2 out of this 12 pack, you know." But pretty soon I drink the 12 pack, and then it was like, well, shit, I got to run to a grocery store and find somebody to buy me some beer so I could get rid of the shakes before I go to work. And it just kept snowballing and getting worse and worse. And then once I found the
Wait,
pain
and this
pills,
is wait. This is at how old?
about like 19 or 20.
So you got the shakes at 20.
Yeah. So I was drinking a lot. I was
Clearly.
yeah. And in the midst of this, I had received a scholarship offer. I was going to go to college and wrestle. That was my goal, not to get an education. The byproduct of going to college was that I would get an education in wrestling so I could become a UFC fighter. And you know, you rewind a little bit, that karate instructor that I had was the guy who started the first MMA promotion in Utah. So he was a former wrestler. He hired a guy that ended up being a jiu-jitsu black belt, like one of the, you know, I mean, arguably one of the first in the United States. It was a Pedro Sauer guy. Pedro Sauer started in the late 80s, I believe, in Provo, Utah. And then you had Southern California, the original Gracie Academy. So like you know, and one of the guys that practices here went through like a law school. He went to BYU, and he ended up practicing with Pedro and ended up being real good. And I met him, you know, in the 90s. And so I started learning Kimuras, and yeah. And so my karate instructor was like kind of a badass, not just teaching karate. His job was having a karate school, running a martial arts school. But, you know, he had boxers in there. He had guys wrestling in there. You know, he loved MMA. He started the first MMA promotion. And up until recent, it was one of the longest running MMA promotions in the world. It was called the Ultimate Combat Experience. It aired in like 200 different countries. And,
That's cool.
you know, it was like local
Yeah.
fights, but it was every week. And so that's what I wanted to do. But I graduated high school and I had a scholarship, and then I lost it because of Title IX. Women's and men's fairness in sports. So I was devastated that I wasn't going to college and wrestle. And they acquitted every program in the state of Utah at the time. I think 99 was the last one, and it was at BYU. And I had the grades to go to college, but I didn't have good test scores, like good enough to go to a college. Good. And then I was good enough wrestler to get a scholarship, but I lost it because of Title IX, women's and men's fairness in sports. And so I was just devastated. I followed my brother to Weber State. They had a club. I didn't want to pay for it. And you know, I was at college. I had no direction. And after a year, I dropped out. And so my drinking and drug use progressed to like, you know, Xanax and a little bit of cocaine. And, you know, when I couldn't afford cocaine, it was meth, and, you know, just kind of like
Ooh.
whatever would get me up and go to work. You know,
Wait,
where
wait,
people would drink a cup of coffee, I was using cocaine.
All right. So you started with talking about like downers, like opiates and painkillers.
Yep.
And now you're talking about uppers with meth and,
Yep.
and cocaine. What was your drug of choice in regards? Was it high or low?
It depended on the situation. Like I wasn't using, I mean, at about 19, I quit using to like get high, and I quit drinking. I would drink to enjoy myself. That's what I told myself. Like after work, I'm gonna have a drink. But early on, you know, it's like I found that I couldn't stop. So I tried to limit the amount by only purchasing a certain amount, you know, and then I would end up, you know, going and buying more. Yeah, it never works. And,
That never works.
you know, and then when I found Oxycodone, it was kind of like, okay, well, this will work. And benzos, the Xanax, it's a central nervous system depressant, so it has the same effect as alcohol on the system. So I was like, okay, well, this is like, you know, a pill form of alcohol, so it'll kind of help me relax or whatever. But I worked full time. I was an excavator.
Generally speaking, addicts, They're either like the high, like real fast high, or the real low, like opiate. You were one of the few that liked both.
Yes.
That's
And I liked both because I had to get up and go to work in the morning. And one of my justification was like I really
getting
wasn't a
even.
drug addict
You're getting even. Yeah.
Yeah, if I had a job. And so, it's like if coffee didn't do it, a little bit of cocaine would. And then I couldn't control the cocaine use, and then pretty soon you run out of money, and then it just like it got really bad. I ended up, basically about 18 months after graduating high school and about 6 months after dropping out of my first year of college, losing my job. I rolled my 1-bedroom Jeep Cherokee and ended up not having anywhere to live for a couple of weeks. I was not good at being homeless. So I begged my cousin to move in to her trailer, and she was a former drug user, but she had found recovery and she was sober at the time. So she said, yes, you can move in here, for cheap rent. But there's one rule you can't use. And at the time I had first got introduced to heroin, and it was significantly cheaper than Oxycodone. I shot up once or twice, and I thought, okay, for $10, I can kind of periodically shoot up throughout the day. It'll just take the edge off. I can still go to work. I'll be okay. I hired on at a little landscaping company, and I just
Who
figured
introduced you to it? Who introduced you to it? Was it a friend, family?
So it was a friend that had started using heroin. It was the same friend that was using the Oxycontin, and the same friend that we would drink together, and we grew up together. And
heroin
it's
rewires
just,
you. It rewires you.
yeah, that's the first time I ever did something and that, like, I'm like, okay, as long as I have this, I'll be okay. It doesn't matter what I do. And it was only a couple of months that I used heroin before having the overdose, but I moved into that trailer and I started working, and I tried to manage that use. My mom went back to school and she became an RN, and so I knew I couldn't shoot up in my arms because I didn't want track marks, because I figured she'd turn me in, and so I was kind of like finding sneaky ways to shoot up.
Or the balloon hands. Yeah, the balloon hands that you see.
Yeah, and I was skin popping it, so shooting it subcutaneous. And then I was shooting up in my ankles and finding veins in my wrists and in my neck, and just kind of so she wouldn't figure it out. And I got to where I was, using a couple of balloons of heroin a day and shooting up all throughout the day, but just trying to maintain and go to work and, figure things out and pay lawyer fines and court fees, and it was getting bad. And
it's a mess.
Yeah, I invited somebody over. My cousin and her friend at the time had went out and they had bought some groceries, and they were going to go to dinner, or a movie. They were going to go out, and they had bought some ice cream, so they had to come back to the trailer to drop it off to put it in the freezer. And I had a friend over there. I thought they were going to be gone. One of the rules was I couldn't have anybody in the trailer, and I had went into the bathroom to shoot up a little bit, and I wasn't using any more than I usually used, and I think it was a little more pure, maybe, or maybe it was just a little too much. I mean, there was no fentanyl at the time. There was
Thank
fentanyl,
God.
but it wasn't what it is now.
Yeah.
It's like there was fentanyl patches, but there was no car fentanyl or powdered fentanyl. And I shot up and I got sweaty and I went, oh shit. And then the lights went out. And I didn't know what had happened that night until about 4.5 years later, when Sports Center and ESPN did the short documentary on me. They did a Sports Center piece. They went and found the EMTs that worked on me, the doctor, the licensed clinical social worker, kind of all the people surrounding it. My cousin, they talked to her, they talked to my parents, but I fell in between the door and the toilet, and that girl that was there heard me fall. And so she came over and kind of like pushed the door, and it was a flimsy trailer door. So she could, like, there was a little gap, and she saw me on the floor, and she said I was like breathing really deep every 20 or 30 seconds. And she didn't know what had happened. She didn't know I was a drug user. I was like hiding it. And she started to freak out and was like, "Oh my God, something happened, something happened." And then my cousin walked in at that time, was like, "Hey, who the hell are you?" And her friend, I think he was going through fire school, so he was like CPR certified. Um, yeah, he came in, they busted the door down. She called 911, and he started chest compressions and did chest compressions until the ambulance got there.
Dude.
Later on, I found out that there was a call that was made to 911. An ambulance showed up to a trailer 2 trailers away from where I was at, just previous to me going down. And it ended up being a false alarm. So there was an ambulance within 100 feet of the trailer when they called 911. So they rushed over, and they kind of took over. They started CPR. They did defibrillations. They couldn't get a pulse. According to the documentary or the Sports Center piece, the EMTs did chest compressions and defibrillations off and on for about 16 minutes.
Oh my God.
They would get a pulse, lose it, get a pulse, lose it. They got me to a hospital called Davis Hospital, and there was an undercover narcotics officer that got called. He had arrested me several times, so he knew who I was.
Oh,
He showed up on the scene. He got in there, and he found the syringe that I overdosed on, and it had fallen in between the linoleum and the wall. And so it was like hidden. And then I had my little kit like that I was using to cook the heroin up and inject it. And I had it in a glass case because I wear glasses. And so it was closed off, but he found it, and he called and said, "Hey, it's a heroin overdose." So they administered narcolone, not naloxone. There was no naloxone around at the time. Reversed the effects. And then they didn't know how long I was out before or how long I was without oxygen. And so they induced me into a coma, and I came out, I think, within 24 hours. And I was in the hospital for several days. But the first person that I met, he ended up he was a licensed clinical social worker. They were like, "Hey, it's a heroin overdose. This kid has had a lot of problems. His parents are concerned if he leaves, he's going to die. Will you come talk to this guy, maybe about going to drug treatment or something?" And that guy showed up. But the thing that he was armed with is like, he was a 12-step guy. So he had over 20 years of sobriety, and he was a former heroin addict. And that dude talked to me. And after 5 minutes, like, I wanted to stop years before that. And I tried, the best I could do was about 2 weeks. But I could not stop. Once I started, I couldn't stop. And then I couldn't stay stopped after I started. It's like one time I got completely sober. Somebody called me and was like, "Hey, I got some pain pills. Do you want them?" And I was like, "No." And I didn't want them. And then later that night, I talked myself into just taking a couple because I was sore. And then it led to a fatal heroin overdose 4 months later. It's just like, so this dude talked to me, and I believed him. I mean, he told me some stories, and I was like, I could understand where he was coming from. I could relate totally. It was like he was telling me my story. And I just decided I'm going to listen to this guy. He said, "Hey, will you go to drug treatment?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I left, and I went to drug treatment. I went to a 12-step meeting.
What you're describing is a rock bottom.
Yeah.
And even though at that moment you decided to become sober, like you talked to the guy, you just come out of a heroin overdose. I'm not going to say you're desperate, but you're definitely in need. And this guy filled that need.
Yep.
And it takes a while for the people around you to understand the seriousness of your sobriety.
Oh, yeah.
How long did that take for you?
So I got out of treatment. I had a relapse in treatment. Somebody gave me some pills. I took them, and then I'm like, "Oh, I got to start over." I started over. About 3 or 4 days after I graduated the treatment, it happened again. Just before I knew it, somebody offered me something. I took it, and then I was like, "Oh my God, I can't do," and I started over. And then I stayed completely sober for 5.5 months. I celebrated a sober 21st birthday, and I had got into a relationship with someone who I met in recovery,
Oh,
and she bought me tickets to UFC 57, and it was Chuck Liddell versus Andy Couture 3. I sat in the nosebleeds, and at the time I had cauliflower ear. One of the guys sitting next to me was like, "You look familiar," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, you'll see me out here in a couple years." I mean, totally bullshit, dude. I wasn't even training. I was newly sober. It's like I was just trying to get my shit together, and I had felony drug charges. I had DUIs. I had all this. Dude, there was no way I was doing any of that, and I wasn't supposed to leave the state actually, because of the plea and abeyance that I was in. And, I was an idiot, and I went, and she had a drink, and I went to take a drink of it, and she grabbed it from me, and she said, "Hey, there's alcohol in there." And I'm like, "Wait, what? You're drinking?" And she said, "I've been drinking for several weeks, and I didn't even notice it." And she's like, "Yeah, I've just managed it and maintained it." And I just thought, like, how can she do that? And I'm like, well, I'm 21 now. I can drink legally. Maybe I can have
oh,
a drink. And she bought me a Long Island iced tea. She slid it over to me, and I put it up to my lips, and I set it down. And I thought, dude, you're not being very smart. And she said, "It touched your lips. You're pretty much relapsed. We'll start over tomorrow." And I was like, yeah, all right. So I took that, and I watched Chuck knock out Randy. And I was a huge Randy fan. I mean, I was a Chuck fan too, but not as big a Randy because he was the
dude,
wrestler.
that
He was like
UFC,
the mark.
it,
Yeah.
it, that was like a life highlight. Like I remember when they were announcing the names, sitting there watching it, going, "I actually
Oh,
can't believe that this is taking place right now. Like I
yeah.
can't believe it. I can't believe it." Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So um, I ended up taking that drink, and it led to the worst 2 weeks in one day of my life. Like 4 or 5 days later, I ended up in Iowa with no pants on, like looking for meth. Dude, I caused so much harm. I wasn't supposed to leave the state. So when I got home, I didn't have a place to live, and my parents thought I was sober. I was staying with that girl, but I knew I needed to start over. I needed it. I was like, dude, I can't do this, because I had a taste of recovery. I mean, almost 6 months, and my life was going good, dude. I was starting to work. I was like putting stuff together. I was, thinking about training again. I mean, I had all these desires. I had tons of energy, and um, I called the district attorney and the drug court liaison, and I told on myself. And, halfway through the conversation, they were like, "Hey, stop talking. You're incriminating yourself. Just make it here on Friday sober." And I was like, "It's Monday. Like, there's no way I can make it that far." And they said, "Just try." I begged my parents to let me move in the house just for a day, just to stay the night. I stayed. Um,
Wait. Let's talk about how important that is. You went and called and tried to hold yourself accountable for your own actions. I don't want that to slip by the listeners. Like that right there, is people are like, "Oh, that's stupid." No. Dude,
yeah, I was done.
no, you're waving the surrender flag. You want to get
Yep.
sober. That's incredible. Go ahead. I
Well, and
apologize.
I thought my best opportunity was to go to prison. I was like, dude, if I could go to prison, then I could stay sober for sure, get some time under my belt, and then come out and start over. And so that's why I turned myself in.
Court,
And
prison saves people. Like it really
yeah,
does. Like it
yeah,
breaks the cycle of addiction, allows people to reset. And as
yeah.
awful of a place as it might be, dude, sometimes it saves people's lives.
Well, and it was a controlled environment. So I felt
Yeah.
like, okay, if I could go there, then I have restrictions, I can follow the rules, and then I'll be okay. Um, and she just said, make it there on Friday. I stayed at my parents' house that night. Um, my dad, he was a beer drinker, and he had some Milwaukee's Best, and he went and hid him in his room. And, so I wouldn't take him. And I snuck up into his room in the middle of the night and took one, snuck it out, walked downstairs. I was getting ready to open it, and then he ended up walking down the stairs and looking at me, and he saw the beer sitting there, and he was like, "Son, I thought you weren't supposed to drink." And like I set the beer down, and that was 6,557 days ago. And
What
it's like
year? What year?
April 16th,
Uh,
2006 at about 1:30 in the morning.
this is a good segue. So April 16th, 2006, you finally get sober, right? For a long lasting. Now watch this. February 2nd, 2007, not even a year later, you make your amateur debut.
Yes. Yep.
That felt like a new chapter in your life.
Oh, yeah. First year of competition. I got sober. I turned myself in. I went and got a job. They decided not to send me to prison.
Because of your honesty. Because of your honesty.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
And I got a job because of my honesty. I showed up. He was a friend of my dad's or an acquaintance, and he owned a small plumbing company. So a couple of journeymen, a couple of apprentices. And I went in there to get a job, and I was like, honestly, dude, you probably don't want to hire me. I've got like three days of sobriety. I got to go to these stupid 12-step meetings, and I'm most likely going to prison. And he was like, oh, yeah, sounds great. Maybe we can go to meetings together. You're hired. And I'm like, what? Like, like, holy cow. And I showed up to that meeting with the drug court liaison and the district attorney. And they said, we're not going to violate you. They saw something in me I didn't see in myself. They sent me to, it was a program for guys fresh out of the state penitentiary. So up until recently, I think I was the only graduate of that program that didn't go to prison. But everybody in there did. And man, I heard my story, only I hadn't served time. So it was like a blessing in disguise. I started attending meetings regularly, and I started taking it serious, and I took it serious before, but this time I was ready to be honest. And
you'd be on the team. You're on the team sober. You're not watching from the sidelines. You're an active participant. Yep.
Yeah. And so I started doing what I needed to do. I reunited with my high school sweetheart. We started dating. Within a couple of months, we had a little baby boy on the way.
Congratulations. Yeah. Wait. So you're sober in 2006.
Yep.
Within a few months, you have a baby.
Yep. On the way.
And then February, you're fighting.
Yeah.
Where are you training at?
So my journeyman plumber was a old school karate guy turned kickboxer. And he had trained with a guy named Saka Sem, the Punisher. He was a old school Muay Thai fighter.
Right.
And so he had learned, how to hold the Thai pads. He'd learned, and he had started a little gym, and there was a pretty big Hispanic community in that area that was boxing as amateurs and professionals. And he opened a gym and had a little gym where it was like $40 a month to do boxing and kickboxing. And it was just a part-time thing. And he's like, well, dude, I can show you how to punch and kick. And I was like, dude, great. And so I went over there, and then I ended up partnering with him, and I went back to the guy that I learned jiu-jitsu from, and I found a new guy kind of in that area. And he told me if I taught wrestling, he would teach me jiu-jitsu. Cause I couldn't afford a payment. So I started, he'd show me like an arm lock.
Who was this with? Who was this?
His name was Eddie Mori at the time. Okay. And he wasn't the original guy. The original guy was a guy named Mike Colby, and he never really competed, but he was it's like a
knowledgeable.
Yeah. Knowledgeable guy. He black belt, probably one of the better guys I grappled with,
really?
in a long, like pretty incredible actually. So I started doing that, and then I started teaching people. I was lifting weights again. And
you went from a guy, DUI, cops always looking for you. Now you're instructing in a class as
4 DUIs. Felony drug charges, felony inciting a riot, felony criminal mischief, fraud. Dude, I'm telling you, like, I had enough charges on mandatory minimums to go to prison for about 12 years.
So
rough.
In essence, you went from the dregs of society where every cop knew you to where now those same cops are hearing he's instructing classes for other people.
Yeah. Yep. And then I went back and I donated time at the high school for the high school wrestling team. Me and my girlfriend, we were I wanted to marry her. I met her when I was 15 in high school. So I chased her around for a number of years, and then because of my drinking, she left. After I got sober, we reunited, and she was like, man, this is everything I wanted, minus the alcohol, So we got back together. We had little baby Isaac on the way, and I was working and I was training, and I had about 40 competition jiu-jitsu matches. I had 10 amateur boxing matches, one semi-pro boxing tournament called the Rough Man Nationals. It was in Colorado, or no, it was in Wyoming, Rock Springs, Wyoming. It was like there was only 4 weight divisions, and you had 3 fights in one night. It was professional sized gloves. So we had 10-ounce gloves.
10-ounce gloves.
But it was 2-minute rounds, and it was 3 2-minute rounds. And then the finals were 4 2-minute rounds. And I won that in, it was super middleweight. It was like 189 or so. It was some odd, semi-pro boxing tournament in Rock Springs, Wyoming. Yeah. And, so I did that.
You had no free time.
No, I was competing. I was going to make it to the UFC. I knew it. And
so right away after you got sober, that came back again. You know what?
Yeah.
Go back to my original goal.
Yep. And my only apprehension was if I fought a good Division I All-American or a good college wrestler, that would be my downfall, because I didn't have the college wrestling experience. So I learned jiu-jitsu. I got my ass kicked by a 14-year-old boxer. He was like kind of flabby, skinny arms, maybe like 20 pounds less than me, and he just beat the shit out of me. And I'm like, dude, I got to learn. And so him and his dad trained me, cornered me for all those fights. So in that first year of competition, I had 10 amateur boxing matches, a semi-pro boxing tournament, 2 professional boxing matches, 1 4-round and 1 6-round fight, and not against like great professionals, but guys at my level.
No, you're getting in there.
I wanted to know if I made it to the UFC, could I handle myself with a reasonable boxer, not a great boxer, but a reasonable boxer. And then I did that in jiu-jitsu. I mean, I took wrestling as far as I could. I wasn't going to go back to college and wrestle, but I started going back to the high school, which was the closest thing to me. And then at the time, they had started a program, but it was about 60 miles away. But my very first partner was a guy named Dave Anderton. So he wrestled at Rick's College, BYU, Idaho, and then he transferred to Oklahoma State. He lost to Brock Lesnar in the finals of the NCAA, or in the national tournament. It was like 11-13. He was this great big.
Gosh.
He was about 330 pounds, and he was this great big guy, but he was my partner, and he really helped me get ready for wrestlers. So it's like God put a wrestler in my way so that I could get that wrestling.
You put an ambulance in your life.
Yep.
I mean, it's a reoccurring theme with you.
Yep.
Yeah. But you attribute that to? You said you gave back to the community, the social work that you gave back.
I think so. I think it had a lot to do with it.
100%.
And then and then February 2nd, I took my first fight. I got my hand raised. Technically, it was a pro fight. It says it's on my amateur record because it says I had won, but I had relinquished at the time, I had relinquished my amateur status because I had boxed professionally. So I think it was a mishap, because it was a 5-minute round. It was 3 5-minute rounds. It only went like 2:30 or 3:30.
Here. So February 2nd, 2007, Bush Cree Promotions, Golden Fights. Jack Dencker is your opponent.
My very first. Yep.
You win by KO. So when you're making that walk to the ring, like, does your life come full circle in your head in regards to because right now, in all honesty, you got a ton of miles on your odometer. They're just not in the ring.
Yeah. I was ready for it. I went out. I beat that guy real quick, and I was like, okay, I got more work to do.
Yeah. Here's your more work. March 30th, 2007. A month and a little bit. Rice Stone. You win by submission.
Okay, so he was a junior college wrestler. He was wrestling at, I believe, Western Wyoming, and he was an All-American, and he was big. It was at 205, and I wasn't cutting any weight. I was a little heavier than I am now, about 200 pounds. And I shot into him, and he was like a brick wall. And I'm like, dude, this is my test now. But I had learned jiu-jitsu, so I got him in a Kimura. I rolled him through with a Kimura sweep, and I elbowed him, and it broke his orbital, and his eye kind of like popped out a little bit. And I hopped up and was like, huh? and they stopped the fight. There's one picture of the fight where he's doing this, and then he retired after that. But then I realized, okay, I can compete with a wrestler now. Yeah.
Here, no, this is crazy. Let me set this table, dude. Like, it's nuts. Like, you did it, but for our listener, you're sober, pregnant wife, our pregnant girlfriend at the time, February 2nd, 2007. You get your first win. Month and a couple weeks later, you beat Rice Stone. 3 weeks later, it's Nick Rosenborough for Ultimate Combat Experience.
Yeah.
Nick Rosenborough at this time, this is his 18th fight.
Yeah.
So you're looking at a guy yourself without the pedigree of most people. Like, this is not the fight you're supposed to take.
Yeah. 6'6", and about 230 pounds, dropping down to 205. Big guy.
So he's a heavyweight 500 fighter, at 9'9".
Yeah.
Going down to 205. In other words, now he's got discipline in his life.
He was one of Jeremy Horn's disciples.
Yes.
So he was kind of one of his top athletes at the time. Yep.
It's a reoccurring theme in your career, fighting Jeremy Horn guys. Yeah.
Yes.
So you win by decision. You beat him by decision.
Win by decision. And in the midst of this time, I was doing piss tests for the state of Utah, like calling in. I was still on that probationary period. Yeah. Oh yeah. Dude, like heavy probation. And I was doing my best to make it once I had a taste of that victory. And
Did you get high from it?
I did. And like, I knew I was on the right path to make it to the UFC, but inside I was neglecting my recovery because I was putting fighting first. But I didn't want to admit it to myself. I knew as long as I didn't drink, I was still going to the meetings. I was still doing kind of what the people said. It was a 12-step program. I'd worked the first 3 steps. But the idea is you go and you work all 12 steps, right? And then you turn around and you pass those 12 steps on to somebody else. And that's what ensures your sobriety and your recovery. With that
for those at home,
program.
For those at home, look up and read the 12 steps of AA. It's just, they're like guide stones to life. They really are. There's nothing crazy in there. There's absolutely nothing crazy. It's just
a way of living.
Dude, it's little tweaks that you can take from it. Every single step you can take something from it. Whether your higher power is there or it's not, there's still, it's a fantastic like life path, to carve yourself after. So go ahead. I apologize.
So I had put that on the back shelf, put my recovery second, but I kept competing. So I ended up having, my 4th fight and my 5th fight, and I started having these successes. I was still smoking a pack a day of Marlboro Blend 27s because I left treatments. I had to have something.
Well, AA people love cigarettes and they love their coffee. Those are the 2 things for sure.
Yeah. So I was still smoking, but I would cut back, when I was fighting, and I was helping run that gym. I was working full time, and I got about 6 months into it. I don't remember the fight that I was at. It was maybe my 4th or 5th fight or something like that. And I got a call from my other friend, Jared Kelton was the next one, and he was a great kickboxer. He had quite a few MMA fights. Yeah, and then I had Jared Kelton,
then Fumano. You win by arm triangle. Hey, wait, let's keep this in mind. These are all 2007. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's your 5th fight in 2007. That's June 2nd. June 16th, 2 weeks later, DeMarcus Johnson. DeMarcus Johnson is 6-5. He was on The Ultimate Fighter season 9, and he's got veteran of 10 UFC fights. So you have an inability to say no to a fight.
And that was the light heavyweight tournament too. So it was 4 fights in 6 weeks essentially to win the Utah state title. Under that promotion that Mike Stidham's Ultimate Combat Experience, who was my childhood karate instructor. Yep. And so I went with it. And then after the DeMarcus fight, it was going to be challenging to find fights because they were kind of the top three guys in the state. There's two or three other guys that were kind of like a little bit bigger name. There's a few that would come in.
You're not
Yeah.
framing this thing right. You're talking about the top three guys in the state, and you finished all three. It wasn't decision. It was finish.
Yeah. It was. I had found my niche. I had put the time in. I was pretty confident, and I was continuing to get better. I was continuing to get stronger. And then around that time, CrossFit started. And so there was a guy here in Utah that was a level 1 certified CrossFit guy that was a former freestyle wrestler. So we started doing these hard anaerobic conditioning, and then we'd wrestle in between and do escapes from bottom. And so that's kind of the start of my conditioning stuff, which I'm known for, having incredible conditioning. And that was kind of the foundation. I kind of thought
smoking.
and smoke. Well, I figured I was better smoking and training than smoking and not training. So I was like, I'll take what I can get. And then when people would ask me, they're like, dude, will you smoke? And I was like, yeah, it's better than heroin. And I didn't tell them about my use,
Right.
but I was being serious, and they're like, yeah, I guess you're right.
I never really thought of it that way.
Serious, dude. Yeah. Yeah. So, I just, I rolled with it, and then I got a call from my other friend. So there was Brady and Cody. Cody was the one I used the heroin with. I had separated myself from everybody, and then my friend Brady, the other kid, who I also used with, just like Cody, we had traded drugs, we had drank, we had lost, we tried to get sober, like we really struggled together. And he noticed that I was doing really good, and he said, hey, can you help me get sober? And I called, one of the guys I really looked up to at the time that was in long-term recovery. And he said, dude, don't go hang out with him. You go hang out with him, you're going to get loaded. That's what happens. And he said, invite him to, a meeting. And if he shows up, great. Then you can introduce him to some people. And then that way you're staying safe and you give him a chance. And I just thought I was different. I was like, dude, this guy doesn't know our relationship. I've known this kid since before I went to grade school. And so I went and I said, okay, hey, listen, we'll go to Cabela's. We'll buy some fishing tackle because we were fisherman buddies. And I said, we'll go to a 12-step meeting and then we'll go fishing sober. And we made it to Cabela's. He ended up going in the bathroom, and later on I found out he had snorted a bunch of pills. And so he got high. And when he came out, I knew he was high. And one of the things was like, hey, listen, don't use it in front of me. And we went there to get sober, and I'm like, dude, you're loaded. And he was like, it's my prescription, blah, blah, blah. And I was really frustrated. I was like, how dare you? And I drove him home. I basically like helped him up to his room because he was like pretty messed up, but not like bad enough to take him to the hospital or anything. I laid him down on his bed, and I was like, dude, I can't hang out with you until you get sober. Sorry, man. I'm gonna have to meet you in a meeting. I just regurgitated what that guy told me. And he was like, fuck you. You're the drug addict, not me. And I'm like, I'm sorry, man. I'm out of here. And I left. His mom overheard the conversation. One of the rules for him to be at home and stay at home was he couldn't use. And she overheard that. So she came in and she was like, hey, you're out. And he's like, no, it wasn't me that was loaded. It was Court. And he pushed me and he punched me and he made up some crazy story, just to whatever, to get out of the blame being put on him.
He's desperate.
And I had left already. And I mean, they babysat me growing up, and we babysat him, and we fished, and we went to school together. And she said, well, if he hits you, then we need to call the cops. And he said, okay, yeah, let's do it. And so,
no,
because I think she was trying to call his bluff, and
he's desperate. And he's desperate.
Yeah, desperate to have a place to live. And so he called, and that same officer that was responsible for me being alive showed up to my house where I was living and was like, Court, I haven't seen you for 6 months. You look like you're doing good. What happened at this Brady kid's house? And I was like, and I didn't want to like narc on him. And so I was like, he's having a tough time. I was trying to help him. And he said, okay, so you admit you went into his house? And I was like, well, yeah, I carried him up to his bed. And he's like, I'm sorry, dude. I got to place you under arrest for burglary, entering his house with the intent to harm him. That's a second-degree felony, man. And I've got 4 felonies and a plea in abeyance. I have a DUI that was,
Oh
I
my
was getting
God, dude.
reduced to alcohol-related reckless. So it's felony DUI charges.
For those people trying to get sober, this always happens to people. Like it all, like right when you finally got a good little stretch of time and you're serious, you're gonna face one last bit of adversity to remind you of what you just came from. That's a fact. That's a fact.
Yep. Oh,
how does it play out?
I was devastated. I got arrested. That cop, he told me I could call my boss. So I called him and said, hey, I'm not going to come to work. I called the drug court liaison, and I was like, and my probation officer, hey, I got arrested. I didn't do it. I said, I tried helping a kid, but I've got to go to jail now. And that dude was really kind. And he let me call everybody, and I called my parents and told
he saw
them,
you were sober. That's why he saw you were sober.
Yeah. And so I went to jail, man. And I thought I had asked to go to prison 6-7 months before that. And Isaac wasn't born yet. He wasn't born until May the next year. So she was like in her first, 4 or 5 months. We weren't living together. She wanted to be married if we lived, she wanted to be married for us to live together. So she was staying with her family. I was staying by myself. I was trying to make it, I was trying to get out of trouble. And I told her too, like, I'm going to marry you, but I want to have 2 years of sobriety because I don't trust myself.
Yeah.
And, and I already made a decision. I knew I was going to be a dad. I was going to do whatever to take care of, our son. And then it was just gut wrenching, getting arrested for the first time that I didn't do it. First time I've ever been arrested and I didn't do it,
Yeah.
And I ended up getting out. Once again, the district attorney didn't violate me.
Did the guy show up to court against you?
He did. So he filed charges, burglary charges, and assault.
There goes that relationship. He allowed you. Hey,
dude, I was devastated. Now, a few things happened. I fought Justin Ellison next, right after that.
You went by
Jeremy
KO.
Horn's jiu-jitsu coach.
Yeah, so that's your second Jeremy
That's
Horn
my second
student.
And then I got an opportunity. Hey, would you be willing to fight Jeremy Horn? And
wait. This is your 8th fight in 2007.
Yeah.
So
he had just knocked out Forrest Griffin. Right. And he just choked out Chael Sonnen. And then the fight before that, he fought Chuck Liddell for the light heavyweight UFC title.
Yeah. I think he beat Frank Shamrock by this time as well. Just lost to Frank Shamrock, but was winning the fight, lost in the last round.
Yeah.
He was 79, 16, and 5.
Yeah. And that was number 8.
That was your 8th fight of the year. In your first year of competition.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
And Jeremy's seen you fight twice and studied your film. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I thought, now I'm actually going to go to prison. I didn't have money for a lawyer. So I got a court appointed attorney, a public defender. And he was like, dude, you got a plea bargain, man. You're not going to win this. And I'm like, fuck you, dude. I'm not plea bargaining. I'm taking this to a jury trial. And he's like, well, I don't have a lot of time. You're going to have to get witness statements. You're going to have to do a lot of the work. And I was like, okay. So I went and found people that, that guy Brady told them the craziest, he told like 10 different versions of the story just because he was loaded. He was sick, he was sick like I was a year before.
And desperate.
And desperate.
Yeah.
And he wanted to save face. And so I stayed out of jail. I got an opportunity to train. And then somebody told me, hey, there's season 7 Ultimate Fighter tryouts. And looking back, I'm like, what were you thinking, dude? So I went and tried out for the Ultimate Fighter season 7. I sat next to Matt Brown, who ended up being on the show.
This was in New York.
Sadal ended up winning it.
You went to
New Jersey.
Newark,
New Jersey. Yep.
Okay.
I went and tried out. I made it through all the tryouts, and I had a poster of me fighting Jeremy Horn, and I hadn't fought him yet, but it was the face-off. It was like the propaganda for it, like a upcoming fight poster. It was gonna be the biggest fight in Utah. Court the Crusher is going to fight this, legend, Jeremy Horn, who's the legend in the state at the time too, and in the world. And I thought that was my ticket into the Ultimate Fighter, but I didn't tell him about the drug addiction. I didn't tell him. And looking back, had they had called me and I went on the show, I wouldn't have showed up for my jury trial, dude. Like they would have arrested me. I wouldn't have worked.
Warrant.
Like what was I thinking, And I went back home. I went to my jury trial. And I was found not guilty, which was a huge weight off my back.
Dude, how much anxiety did you have when they were going to read the verdict?
A lot, but when I was put on the stand, I told them I went there to help him, but I understand that you cannot give that which you do not have. And I had nothing to offer him other than to invite him to a 12-step meeting. And
was
if
this
you
a
want to put
jury
me
or
in
bench
jail,
trial? Bench
jury.
trial? Okay.
Jury.
Okay.
And they deliberated for less than 2 hours and found me not guilty on all charges. I walked out a free man, huge weight off my back, knew I wasn't going to prison. I didn't get violated for all the other shit I had in the plea in abeyance. I had like 200 clean UAs. Like I had a list of meetings I'd went to, like hundreds of meetings that year. And I wanted to make it to the UFC. I got the call back and they said, you didn't make it. So I was like, oh shit. A month before that, when I fought Jeremy, or when I was getting ready to fight Jeremy, I asked my boss if I could have 1 day off a week to train. And he said, if you need a day off, you go find a new job. And I quit my great commercial plumbing career because I thought making it on the Ultimate Fighter was going to be my ticket to the UFC. So, and then I went out and I fought Jeremy Horn and I lost the decision, which I was pretty devastated. But after, I wasn't completely disappointed because I wasn't even supposed to compete with him. And nobody thought I was, including him or his wife at the time, or girlfriend. They were like, dude, you have no business fighting this guy. And then it went to decision. And he was really smart because he kind of, he played against my game plan and he figured it out in the octagon or in the cage. And then after the fight was over, he got his hand raised and I was like, dude, I can compete with guys like Jeremy Horn. And I was like, okay, I got to go back to the drawing board. I'd quit my job. I lost to Jeremy Horn, but I was found not guilty. And I decided, okay, it's been 2 years. I asked my girlfriend to marry me, took her fishing, went and casted out this fake little ring onto the line, threw it out, got down behind her, had her reel in the line, and she pulled up the ring. I asked her to marry me. We got married. I had my high school wrestling coach marry her and I. Officiate my wedding, and I moved 60 miles away from everybody into a ghetto little apartment. And I started training at not Jeremy's gym because his was the top gym in the state. That's why I fought all of his guys because he was the best guys in the state and some of the best guys in the country. Lawler was training there at the time. I mean, like there was
The
real good
Riggs.
guys.
Yeah.
Riggs.
Alex
I mean,
Steedley.
a bunch of legends. Yep. Yeah. Oh yeah. Bunch. And I went to another gym that was down and it happened to be next to the only Division I college in the state. So I started training and then I started going over and asking the wrestlers if I could work with them. And then they would come over and work with me. And I said, I'll give myself 2 years to make it. If I don't make it in 2 years, I 100% am going back to work.
Yeah.
And in 2 years.
Real quick, did you ever run into the guy that pressed charges afterward?
I did. I spoke at his funeral 3 years later.
Oh my God, dude. I knew it.
Yep.
I knew it.
And then also too, Cody, my other friend, I went to his funeral too. Both unintentional overdose deaths.
You know what, man? And I'll edit this if you're not comfortable with the question. The people that introduced you to heroin, it irrevocably changed your life for the worst. Am I correct?
Yes.
Did you ever introduce anybody to heroin?
Nope.
Oh, dude, you're one of the few. You have no.
But I didn't use it that long.
Dude, you got in and out. You know what I mean? You got in and out. Like I can't tell you how many people where it's just like, you know, the person that introduced you to heroin, are they a good person or a bad person? Man, they're the worst person ever. Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
How many people did you introduce to heroin? And then you see them, they realize that maybe they're not a real good person because of their actions. Like they don't even understand it until it's asked that way.
Yeah.
It's such a devastating drug, man.
Yeah. So I fought on the local scene for the next 2 years. It got really hard to find fights. And then I got an opportunity to try out for the Ultimate Fighter season 11.
Here, Clint Reiser, you win by KO in Wyoming. Chad Meehute, another KO in Wyoming. Jeremy Horn's Elite Fight Night. Hank Weiss, another one of his students, I believe, right?
No, but a former Mark Schultz wrestler and one of the toughest dudes. And now he's the head coach and I'm the assistant coach at a high school.
Really?
Yeah.
He's 23-11 at the time. You beat him by decision. So you went up against a very high level wrestler. Isidoro Gonzalez, you beat him by decision. Dale Jarvis, you win by KO. And then you have a tough 11 tryout.
Yep.
What was the process?
So, number one, I was armed with the 12 steps. I had finished my 12 steps. I started attending meetings regularly and started working with other people that needed help. And my life and attitude changed. I showed up to the Ultimate Fighter tryout. I did the tryouts. I made the physical tryouts. I had the record. I think I was 11-1 at the time. And the interview process, they came to me and they said, so you tried out for season 7, you didn't make it. I have notes here that like every other guy. And I was like, oh man, this is okay. And he said, so what makes you different from everybody here? And I was like, to be honest, I said, the only thing that makes me different is if I stay sober for another couple of months, I'll have 4 years of continuous sobriety. And I said, I have a hell of a criminal history. So I got a good story. And they were like, we love you, dude. Okay, get out of here. I got a call 2 days later.
Yeah, you're hired.
Yeah. Yeah. And I almost didn't go out of fear.
That's 2 times that your addiction and criminal history got you jobs.
Yep.
I always tell people that, man, that are like, you know, former felons. It's the way you present it, dude. You know, if you're trying to hide it, they're going to be suspicious. If you're, hey, dude, from the door, this is what's going on. This is what I'm doing now. This is what I was. They'll be a lot more comfortable with you.
Yep. Hey, I need to go to teach this class.
Court,
can we pick up?
You do whatever it is you want to. This is fantastic, man. I really appreciate your time. Awesome. We got up to this point. I'll see you back in Utah next time I'm out there.
Fantastic. Thanks.
And
we can pick this up another time too.
I would love to. Thanks, brother.
Check out the full interview on iTunes, Spotify, and all major podcast platforms.